Good afternoon, and welcome to the Brothers' War. If you'd like to see more of my chronological documentary of the American Civil War, covering it month by month, 160 years after the fact, please leave a like and subscribe. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I live tweet day by day the highlights of that day, 160 years ago. The link to that is in the description. On to the war. On the 1st, General Lee instructs Colonel Thomas Jackson to raise 5 regiments of infantry, 1 cavalry regiment, and 2 field artillery regiments to bolster the Army of Virginia. Also on the 1st, a memorial service is held for the soldiers who died last month in the riots in Baltimore. The state of Maryland authorizes $7,000 to be divided among the families of the deceased. Also on the 3rd, Lincoln forms the Department of Ohio, George McClellan commanding. McClellan is a promising Army officer, albeit with little experience, forwarded from the Ohio militia. He will select his father-in-law to be his chief of staff. The War Department also plans an expansion of the Federal Army, adding 8 infantry regiments and 1 regiment each of artillery and cavalry. They have no shortage of volunteers. Governor Morton of Indiana calls for a proportionally equal number of volunteers to join the Indiana State Militia. He asks for about 4,000 men. Over the next 8 days, he will receive 12,000 volunteers. On the 14th, McClellan will be promoted to Major General, making him the second most senior officer in the U.S. Army. And I'm going to forego a detailed biography of McClellan at this point. There will be a detailed one to come later on. May 6th is a very eventful day for the Confederacy. On this day, Jefferson Davis signs the Confederate Declaration of War, making the conflict official. Arkansas secedes, and the Tennessee legislature passes a measure to put secession to a referendum. Furthermore, within the Confederacy, General Robert E. Lee sends a letter to General Cocke instructing him to take his brigade and set up headquarters at the Manassas Gap Junction. Lee foresees an attack coming through that region, since in order to take Richmond, the crucial rail and communications hub at Manassas must be taken. Lee is guessing that the blow will come south, one way or another, and the blow will fall at Manassas. I guess only time will tell. On May 9th, a fire breaks out at a liquor store in D.C. Firefighters attempt to control the fire, but they are unable. Colonel Elmer Ellsworth and his fire zouaves, so called because he recruited them from the fire departments, immediately go into action. Ellsworth grabs a bugle and orders his regiment to the task. The men extinguish the fire and save the building. Also on this day, William Tecumseh Sherman is appointed colonel of the 13th Federal Infantry Regiment. To close out the day, the U.S. Naval Academy is moved from Annapolis, Maryland to Newport, Rhode Island, citing the fact that Maryland may soon become a war zone. On the 10th, we meet the quote-unquote young Captain Nathaniel Lyon, the commander of a small garrison of Union troops supported by German émigré abolitionist militias. He marches his men to Camp Jackson, Missouri, where he outnumbers the Confederate defenders 10-1. The Confederates surrender without a fight, and Lyon parades them through St. Louis, provoking a riot. This was almost certainly intentional, because it gave Lyon cause to enact martial law in Missouri. Missouri is in a very complicated situation at the moment. The governor, Claiborne Jackson, is a secessionist, and Missouri is a slave state. But Missouri has not seceded. The legislature is pro-union. Furthermore, Missouri is home to thousands of German immigrants and refugees, having found political asylum in the United States after the Revolution of 1848 in Germany. These immigrants were shocked by the gross inequality and slavery in Missouri, and they will prove valuable in the messy conflict we will see over the coming weeks and years. On the 11th, General Benjamin Butler sends a contingent of forces to set up a relay house 10 miles from Baltimore in preparation for the military occupation of the city, which comes on May 13th. I went into detail last week on the necessity of Maryland not seceding, and having thousands of federal troops patrolling the streets of Baltimore will do much to ensure that they do not. May 14th. The Second French Empire, the Kingdom of Spain, and the Netherlands follow the example of the British Empire and declare neutrality in the conflict, with the proviso of recognizing the Confederacy as a belligerent, not as a country. This means that the Confederate Navy can use their ports and legally receive aid and arms, but not diplomatic recognition or treaties. On the 20th, North Carolina secedes. On the 21st, Winfield Scott officially proposes the Anaconda Plan to the cabinet, proposing strengthening the naval blockade, steaming up the Mississippi River, and thereby cutting the Confederacy off from the rest of the world and starving it into submission. This is in competition with General Irvin McDowell's Direct Assault Plan, which consists of amassing an overwhelming force in one location, marching it south, capturing the railroad at Manassas, and then riding the rails down to Richmond. The cabinet will debate the merits of both of these plans and be unable to reach a decision this month. Either way, McDowell will become the commander of the Department of Washington, commander of all the troops, and the defense of the city on the 27th. Also on the 21st, the second session of the Provisional Confederate Congress comes to a close. On the 23rd, the voters of Virginia ratify the decision made by their legislature the previous month to secede. And what of our friends in the 1st Minnesota? Well, it seems right now that they're going to be assigned to garrison the forts around the state in order to free up the federal troops to go to D.C. This is incredibly unpopular with the men who signed up to crush the rebellion. On the 3rd, Colonel Gorman notified Governor Ramsey that the enlisted men of the 1st Minnesota were in need of shoes, coats, caps, and socks of the standardized pattern, but they didn't have enough tents, knapsacks, haversacks, canteens, axes, spades, or picks. It would be 6 days until the 9th when black hats and trousers would be provided. K Company, who were known as volunteers, kept their gray suits. On the 4th, the Secretary of War wired Governor Ramsey that the regiment would be needed not for 3 months, but for 3 years. This was presented to the men, and nearly all of them re-enlisted for a 3-year contract. On May 14th, Colonel Gorman would be presented with a gift of a fine horse and all equipment needed by his friends, and a week later, the first regimental ball was held on Nicollet Island. On May 24th, the 1st Minnesota, with all equipment necessary in hand, marched to St. Paul and received the first of its regimental colors, a Minnesota state flag. On the 28th, orders received and fully marshaled, Major Dyke took command of Company B and Company G to garrison Fort Ridgely and free up the federal troops there. In the evening of the same day, the regiment was presented with the 2nd regimental colors, the Star-Spangled Banner. 1 day later, on the 25th, Company A under Captain Wilkin relieved the federal troops at Fort Ripley. To conclude the month, on the 25th, Union troops captured Alexandria, Virginia, directly across the Potomac from D.C. Alexandria will remain occupied for the duration of the war and provide an essential springboard from which will come many offensives in the Eastern Theater. While this is occurring, on the night of the 24th to 25th, Colonel Ellsworth will sneak into the Marshall House Hotel and finally tear down the Confederate flag that has been taunting Washington for the past month. He will be shot by the hotel's proprietor, who will in turn be shot by Francis Brownell, one of Ellsworth's men. Brownell will be the first recipient of the Medal of Honor for this deed. Ellsworth is the first officer casualty of the Civil War, and he will become a martyr for the Union cause. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, give it a like, and if you didn't, a dislike. In the comments, you can leave suggestions for special episodes, questions for the Q&A, and whatever else you'd like to put in there. Also, I've purchased a lot of books and hardware to make this series possible, and to kind of make up for that, I have started a Patreon, which is very work in progress, but I would largely, immensely appreciate any help y'all will be willing to give. It's no big deal, it's just the show kind of takes some money to make. I'm only sharing this at the end because I can see from the YouTube analytics that only about 10% of viewers get this far, and you guys are the best. You are the very core of the community I'm trying to grow here. The link for that's in the description. Please be sure to share this video with the history buff in your life, and I will see you next time, where the danger at DC has largely passed, and seeing that no offensive will come over the Potomac, Lincoln instructs the drawing up of plans for ending the war. Beauregard and McDowell eye each other's forces across the water, waiting to see who flinches first.